A CEO at a bank used to make about 20x what a bank teller made. Now he makes about 1,000 times that much. And I'm not saying that innovation shouldn't be awarded or rewarded, but when the sea between the people who are providing adequate input to the people who own that input as a product is this wide, you have to start to ask, what are we owed post-production? To do or not to do DEI is to do or not to do Title VII. And yes. The finance folks go, it is just to do or not to do the types of liability lines that are tied to Title VII. And that's the world that we live in. The law works, it can work. And for everyone who's a little on edge right now, I think it is important for you to remember that the law has not changed.
Yes.
Yes. We've gotten so far. When people go, there's a pushback and we're taking 10 steps back. No, we're not.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us with Sundays with Vernā. We are in for such a treat today. We are going to learn about so many interesting things that have to do with DEI and inclusion and insurance and data, you name it. We are going to hear from James Felton Keith. And welcome, James. How are you?
I'm good. New York is sunny today. I'm at home.
I know, love that. So yes, James, or as he is often called, JFK, James Felton Keith, is an award-winning mechanical engineer, labor economist, and global advocate for equity and inclusion, and the CEO of an organization called Inclusion Score Companies, which he pioneered as the first international diversity certification, and a founder of Detroit's LGBT Chamber of Commerce, to redefining the labor movement through data unions. And his work bridges technology and culture and justice. Just the kind of person that we want to have on Sundays with Vernā. He's clearly a visionary, and his career spans 20 years and 5 countries. He has a new book out called Data is Labor, and we're going to learn more about what that title means as he explores in this book the evolving relationship between personal data in a AI-driven economy. So welcome, JFK.
Thank you. Thank you so much for, wow, that bio. Sometimes when I hear it, it makes me, I don't know what to do with my face. I'm always like, okay, wait, don't cringe. It's so much.
I mean, it speaks to, I think, the genius of intersectionality, and also speaks to how important it is to follow the connections, I think. In this work, I also have I have this brain. I'm not an engineer at all, but I have this brain where everything's connected to me. Yeah. Like all things are related to another thing. And I often find that we're dealing in a world where people's view is either short-sighted, or it's so separate that they don't make those connections. So I wanted to hear more about your professional journey and how you got to where you are right now.
Oh, wow. This used to be a much easier story to tell, but I think when I think about my childhood, the objective was to, through engineering and then on through grad school, was to see, how could I validate my own existence? Because it's not that I was ever told, as Viola Davis does in that movie, to help, like, you is good, you is kind. No one was telling me, except for my mother. She would go, you is good, you is kind. I believed her. I still believe her. I think now I've kind of run away with it. And she's like, you should calm down a bit. You're not that good. You're not that kind. But I was constantly burdened by this question of, can you value yourself and your community first? And as a result, potentially everyone else's. And it's just always been at the back of my mind. And I did that, while having a day job. So I got out of grad school and I got into consulting. I worked with like Hewlett Packard and a bunch of firms like that. And our clients were insurance companies. That's how I got into insurance. And I had clients everywhere. I got lucky and was able to, work in China and Africa and, the Middle East and all these places with these mid-sized insurance companies, basically selling them tech, but also always still being burdened by this question of, am I valuable? How valuable am I? And applying that question to everyone else. And, that really got me into sort of the advisory boards that built this international standard in DEI. But as the engineer, I said, oh, we've done this before. My career at HP was based on the ISO standard in IT. I was like, what if we made people change management?
Yes.
Start to work like IT change management. I think we can process that if we first understand, what does everyone do? What do the procurement people do? What do the HR people do? What do the line manager people do? I said, we know all these things. We can put it in a spreadsheet. And if we can put it in a spreadsheet, I can run a few if-then statements and code eyes. That's not a word, by the way. What happens when? And from there, I can understand risk. And so, fast forward to now, I can't believe we're in 2025. I still feel like it's 2019, but whatever, we're here. Fast forward, I think for my core work at Inclusion Score, what we do is we use the international standard for DEI, ISO 30415, and we audit firms.
What's that number a reference to?
Oh yeah, ISO 30415 is the numbered publication of the International Organization for Standards DEI standard. So
okay.
For any of your listeners that aren't familiar with the ISO, since World War II, really a little bit before, but let's just say the past 75 years, everything that we've done well as a species, we have kind of agreed and caucused upon agreeing about at the ISO. So there are ISO standards for the textiles in your shirt, the fuel in your car, but also IT and quality control and manufacturing, and now DEI. And I don't just mean regular DEI like the big ideas, the big principles, but the corporate workflow management of governance, things we do with our executives, HR, things we do with our employees, but also product, whether our product is a service or something more tangible. And last but not least, our supply chain or procurement, or what we've come to call supplier diversity. And so we workflow those. And again, the International Organization for Standards, it should be iOS, but it's called the ISO for short. If people ever see ISO, we call it ISO a lot. There's a little logo with an ISO on a red globe. Started in Geneva, mostly led by Americans post FDR, but there are a lot of older orgs like AFNOR in France, which is 20 years older than ISO, who came to the table in Geneva to help start that organization. So like we run the class that certifies French people in DEI per the ISO 30415 standard at AFNOR, a much older organization. The French were organized as, the rest of us came apart. The Germans got to them last, so the institutions were still in place if anyone's not familiar with their World War II history. But that's really the ISO. We use it because it's a trusted caucus. It's a consensus. And so as the mechanical engineer or the process engineer, when I got into this work and I looked out at how can we incentivize more inclusion at companies in general, because it's generally good for the economy.
Yes.
As the labor economist in me thought about that, I said, well, we first need to agree on what the hell we're talking about. And so the ISO, it took about 10 years to write. It started with a bunch of people. I was not there, but some of my early business partners, like Dawn Bennett Alexander, who was the first employment lawyer. She wrote the employment law book. She started suing people on Title VII in 81. I was born in 81. So she's been doing this for nearly 44 years. And like Ephnus Henderson, who's just a little bit newer than her, he was our lead convener at the ISO. And over about, a few thousand people across 163 countries, we got a general consensus of where we were starting. And the thing about standards is it may evolve and it may change, but we at least establish what we're talking about first.
So when you put together these standards, right, knowing that there are differences all over the world, but you're trying to come to one standard, what did you, what was the process like? And then how did you settle on what you came up with ultimately?
Yeah, from a process standpoint, I would say the ISO standard, but really standards in general, exist as a path to first identifying the participants in the community and then allowing them at least access to affirm themselves. The only thing that we would say are intolerant of in the standards community, and not just with DEI, just with anything else, is intolerance. And so, and what I mean specifically about being intolerant of intolerance is the only thing that we mandate, especially in this DEI standard that everyone acknowledge, is everyone else's agency. So let's say, because we've had people come to us like, let's say at a corporation, I regularly get, should corporations have religious ERGs? And my response is, certainly, as long as there is a clause in how that we call ERGs feedback mechanisms per the standard, as long as it states that their mandate cannot be to strip any other individual or group of their agency. Because as business practitioners, we exist to identify and engage everyone. And so the quote that I like to reference the most is that, and what we're actively doing here is that individuals are at their best when they identify with a community. That's always there. And communities are only, which is I think the key word, only at their best when they identify all of their individuals. And what it suggests is that you're constantly in this process of hacking and understand who the makeup of your community is. And it may be different tomorrow than it was yesterday. So humanity and its micro identities down to the data point is always evolving until we get to every data point, which is a long ways away.
Yeah.
So
That's so, yeah. I mean, this is really fascinating because you're talking about, again, a paradox of sort, or the two truth switches, that we're individuals, but we're also group members, right? And that is, I think, so important for people to recognize. And I want to ask you about, what we're seeing and hearing in the United States right now about DEI and about color blindness, and even what I'm hearing in some corporate settings when you talk about these ERGs, is that people are purposefully sitting in ERGs to agitate, not to tolerate. And I definitely remember times where people would say, like, sometimes white men would say, well, can we have an ERG? And I'm like, sure, absolutely. But your ERG, I know a lot of people will be like, you already have an ERG, but I understand they're starting to recognize their group identity all of a sudden, and they want to be seen and have these opportunities. I'm like, it's fine, but you have to be about inclusion, because that's what these groups are about building an environment of inclusion. So if what you want to do by having your group is to reinforce or strengthen exclusion, that doesn't work.
Well, yeah, and I think even when, because I think it's interesting you bring that up. I just had an employment lawyer bring to me a case where a disabled woman in an ERG, they have an agitator who comes to deliberately agitate. And I was like, well, if that person is there, they're employed by the company, if they can show, per regular case law, a pattern of retaliation or even of bullying, if they want to identify it that way, and let's say that person, the agitator, comes to 2 or more of those ERG meetings, and you and a peer, a colleague, believe, per a story that you can write down, that there's a pattern of bullying here. I was like, well, that's illegal. Because the law per Title VII really just protects folks specific to retaliation, discrimination. And it's not all just discrimination. You don't have to call me the N-word for me to say there's a pattern of intimidation or retaliation. You're retaliating because we're meeting, trying to figure out how can we get better access to the management rung or a ramp in front of the building because it's ADA compliant, which is illegal to fail to comply with per the Civil Rights Act of 1991, signed by old school, H.W. Bush. We voted for Jesse, but I wasn't voting, but I remember walking to the polls. The point is, white men are protected under the law right now. And
Yes.
in other places, in India, Hindu men are protected. I think they have the most progressive constitution of any. In South Africa, Afrikaners are protected. So I can just show up and say, you looked at me funny, you're racist.
Yes.
Got a
Right.
case now. Whereas
Yes.
yesterday, I would not have had a case. And so we're on a slippery slope, both from again, as an engineer, I'm still just thinking about this, like, what will the lawyers say? What will Vernā say? And what will the finance people say? What would, my friend who's COO at Zurich says? The difference between the lawyers and the insurance folks is the insurance people, they're kind of passive about this, because if the professional liability market can grow by double, they kind of want to sell you that product. Now,
Yes.
for me, that makes me tell every mid-sized company, when I talk to a CFO at a healthcare company, they're not a big bank. They got 5,000 employees. They're just trying to do their jobs. My conversation sounds like a threat to them. It says, if you don't figure out how to comply with the standard that we'll underwrite you on, your premiums are going to go through the roof. And you don't want to see me. It's why I get to wear crazy glasses. I don't have to be cordial. I've been trying to design a way to get rid of some of it is there, but my regular respectability. I just come in like, look, we're going to take you outside and we'll see.
So this is so interesting, because when I first met you and heard you talking, initially I was like, okay, what does inclusion and insurance have in common? Like, how do they, what is this product? And now you've just explained it, which is that you're making it very clear to organizations and companies that it doesn't make sense in your risk analysis for them to be insured if they're unwilling to do the things that are necessary to create inclusion for all their employees. Is that right?
That's right. So we pay the bill. The way I sum it up in the shortest way possible is I go, who pays the bill when there's a retaliation or discrimination grievance? Forget the suit. It may not make it to court, but even if it settles out of court, if it settles in mediation, insurance, that's an insurance claim. And if your company is uninsurable because it's too rancid, that's fine. It's still illegal. So you still have to settle up. So you can pay it in cash or you can pay it with insurance. And anyone who's got a finance degree, any CFO worth their salt, knows it's better to pay to insure it up front. But if you like paying in petty cash, you can pay.
I am thinking to myself, with all of this harassment and bullying of the administration, it's almost like a lot of companies have forgotten that other side of the equation, right? Because,
Well,
if people feel like they're not being treated fairly, or that somehow the company has abandoned all of its frameworks and interventions to ensure that there is equality and equity and opportunity, and that bias is not alive and well, they somehow forgotten that they will also be this will also be a problem for them.
They forget that it's two sides. And so the way I explain this, and people go, oh, well, Trump or the Justice Department might sue you now. I was like, sure, but the law still hasn't changed. They also don't have the votes to change it. Title VII is still here. The 14th Amendment is still here. They don't have 38 states. They don't have enough votes to change either one of those. And so let's say you are targeted by the Justice Department. Let's say that's one fee. Let's call it $1 million. The people that you back away from, and when you're target and you say, we're going to scrap some programs, but not all programs. If you're a university, we're going to say queer people, Black people can't meet here, but we still recognize every sorority. Okay. I know an employment lawyer who will countersue you for having a sorority. I saw a company, this is a real story, you can Google it. It's a company, a restaurant went out of business in California because a conservative group sued them for having a ladies' night.
Oh, come on.
Now, the company, they could have made all sorts of interesting arguments about pay parity, et cetera, but they're a small business and couldn't afford the regular legal costs. So I have a S&P 500 company right now in food retail stuffs where their chief legal officer just told their chief diversity officer, who he was one of our trainees in the ISO certification class. She said, look, we're prepared for whatever comes to us. Your new job is to work with our outside counsel to make sure we don't lose, because we want to gloat. And we look at this as the cost of doing business, just like back in the day. And back in the day wasn't long ago. I'm talking about 2019. The cost of doing business was, we'll pay those claims for the people who are saying, you pulled my hair, you called me the forbidden name. But now everyone's on alert. So there's a billboard here in Midtown that says, never leave your employer without a lawyer. And I don't know this particular law firm. They're quite small, but I feel like they took it from me because I gave a speech in Vegas a few years ago, maybe 20, you know what? It was during the pandemic. So I'll give them some slack, 21, 22. And I was like, never leave your employer without a lawyer. And the whole crowd was like, yeah, oh, wow. And look, that's the new environment that we live in. Employment lawyers are hunting clients, just like personal injury used to be, or still is. You're riding down the road, you see a billboard, have you been impacted? And when I talk to the National Employment Lawyers Association, the NELA, they're as prepared to sue as the Justice Department might be. And so every company that has a grievance now, the way Zurich, Chubb, AIG, Lloyd's of London is looking at it, is it's double the cost. If you've got one grievance, the counter grievance, if it's not provable, will be following soon. And so that means that regular premium that you would pay to have petty cash to pay either your lawyer or whomever to get out of this hot water, it just went up. And that's the price of a lack of DEI. That's the actual price.
That's the cost. Yeah. And I know that people are afraid and who knows, a host of other things that are going on in people's mind. But yeah, you got to count the cost of anti-DEI, right? Yeah. There is real cost. And I guess one of the things that you talk about is also the value of individuals and of employees. And I want to hear what you are trying to help people to understand, because that was the other thing that just struck me when you were speaking, which is to like, are we being compensated for the value that we bring to our companies? And I want you to just talk about that and how you think about what makes people valuable and your early on question in your life. It seems like you've gotten to an answer.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll be able to get to the solution, but I would, yes, at least like to think I'm on the cusp of, here are a few answers to those questions. Now, whether you can realize all the value that you think you have is questionable. Just we don't get that many years. I feel like you don't get good until you get 40, and then it's like, well, now my leg hurts. So anyway, and my leg actually does hurt, but that's a separate conversation. So I don't think that we are being properly compensated, but I think it's really the mechanism. So I've, in my career, been fortunate to have, great mentors, great opportunities, and to be able to start, even Inclusion Score, we're a venture-backed startup. Every company that I've ever started, I've owned too much of. I'm aware of that, acutely aware of it, but I've never had the mechanism to distribute value back to as many people as possible that have contributed micro or macro value to my company's bottom line. And so right now in 2025, I think we're still using the arguments from the 20th century about wages, which are fine. I think by and large, I like to think about people's wages as a retainer for their time. If I invite you to the table of productivity and I pay you to be there, I'm CEO, you're coming in, I'm bringing in a legal mind, and we both pour in some input to build out, a product. And then we leave that table. You've been compensated, you're good. At least that's the way we used to think about it. But this product's value scales over time per your initial input. The question has to be asked, what are you owed? Right now, the way the market economy works is if I own the rights to that value, back to the lawyers and what is property and who owns it, then I own all the scalable value. Now, I'm not ever saying that the CEO isn't worth twice as much, 5 times as much. I think a doctor in a doctor's office used to make 5x what the nurses made. Decent number. Now it's about 20. A CEO at a bank used to make about 20x what a bank teller made. Now he makes about 1,000 times that much. And I'm not saying that innovation shouldn't be awarded or rewarded, but when the sea between the people who are providing adequate input to the people who own that input as a product is this wide, you have to start to ask, what are we owed post-production? So I don't need you to pay me up front. I need you to, as Beyonce says, pay me in equity. If we do a thing that is valuable, if we do a cheap film like Get Out, one of my favorite films, they did for a couple $1 million, it made hundreds of millions, and I was the lighting guy. I'm not right. I'm not Jordan Peele. I'm not that cool, right? But, I got a family to feed, and this was a really valuable product that I poured into. And I made, $35 an hour, which is in most places in America considered a good wage. It's like, but I really can't afford my rent, and my kids have to learn to read and eat. And it just seems like my input to this is being undervalued, and maybe Jordan's is being overvalued. And to that wage point, and to wrap it up is, if you were making minimum wage in the 80s when I was a kid, like I remember my parents doing what was considered to be pretty well in the early 90s, and then the world radically shifted. But if you were making minimum wage back then, you would have to make, per inflation and adjustments, for an average, and I'm including the CEOs in this, so the average is going to be a little high, about $44 an hour. Most Americans do not make $44 an hour. Half of them make a little bit under 20. But the reason I use that $44 number as the median is because we're all included here, and the CEOs are still in this equation, and they almost double what the median would be if they weren't there, but they exist, and they are, per their skill sets, making products and services based on what they know about us. You only build, your good, whatever it is, at your company based on two types of input. You're either looking at the market directly, extracting data directly from it, like what will Vernā buy? I know she will wear a red shirt because I see red. I'm not trying to sell her purple because it's too expensive to know if she would wear purple. I got a surveyor. I'm not paying for that. I'm gonna sell her red because I know she's gonna go with red. That's her data input. It's involuntary. So you either take data that way, or you hire an expert. You hire Vernā to tell you, here are all the women, assuming you identify that way, use these kinds of products. So, okay, I'm going to bring you in as a product manager. I'm going to pay you $80K to tell me what you know about your demographic, which is still underpaying you, but whatever, I'll pay it to you. That's still about $44 an hour. It's still it's just $80K. So I'll still pay you to do that, right? And then once that's done, I'm done with you, but I'm still going to benefit from the fact that you still need red shirts going forward, right? So I think we are underpaid and undervalued. I think there needs to be another bonus structure and stakeholder class implemented to better distribute the value in the economy. And by value, I just look at total revenues and I look at GDP. For anyone not familiar with GDP, or gross domestic product, it is a measure of transactions. So GDP is that friction that I talked about with matter and energy. Matter has friction and energy proliferates. Value is data having transactions, and value proliferates. They are similar. Value is like that of energy. It cannot be created or destroyed per the zeroth and first law of thermodynamics, but it can change form. And so right now, too much of it is in the form of too few hands. And we can identify, I think, a stakeholder class to better distribute the transactions that we track via GDP. And we can do it via location. We can do it via industry. We can do it company by company. It is not true that we don't know what each individual should get from each company that they interact with. We can establish it. And I think what we'll start to see in the later half of this decade is dashboards established where lawyers will start to make arguments about this data and the input of its value being property that they should be right.
Yeah, that's a powerful idea, and so it's so creative, and you're sort of like, yeah, and that makes so much sense. So what can we do to help, or actually this, what do you think might happen to companies who cannot actually stand up for justice and equality and the benefits of their own markets, of having a strategy to take advantage of markets? Like, what do you think is going to happen? Like, what does the future look like from your point of view?
I think they're going to fall by the wayside, mainly because in the world of AI, like we just started deploying outside of our team of 8, 12 bots to do a lot of work that we would normally do right here, like at Inclusion Score. And as they become more powerful, as Sam Altman says, by the end of the year, bot coders can code any app that you coded 2 years ago perfectly with no flaws. But not only that, they can implement and run any process. They can identify what should go first, second, and third. In a world where any product or service, whether it be banking or automobiles or ice cream cones, when they can be built and distributed by humanoid byproducts, which are doing our labor, by the way, they're doing labor for us, they owe us. But in the world that exists, the brands matter increasingly more. So I don't have to go to Wells Fargo. I can go to JP Morgan Chase. I don't have to go to Ford Motor Company. I can go to General Motors. I don't have to drink Pepsi. I can drink Coca-Cola. Every company that goes, I'm back away from D. I know some places are a desert for, there are a few strongholds out there, Amazon, Walmart, you name it. But outside of those exceptions, consumers are looking for companies with their values. And by their values, I mean just being generally respectable, having a general decency about themselves. I'm not talking about anything radical or propping up any one type of person here or there. That's the work. So I think those companies will fail. And we see it in the data from companies that outperform, from all the McKinsey reports around DEI. We also see it right now. When you look at Target versus Costco, I know people who didn't have a Costco in their town that are now big Costco fans. They're wearing Kirkland t-shirts and drinking Kirkland wine just to brag, like it is a cooler brand than Gucci. My uncle, who's nearly 80, wants to become a greeter there. He always kind of wanted to become a greeter. He loves it. They live in Michigan. But so I just think it goes back to that and where the broader market is going, because it's not just an American issue. Every country is dealing with the onslaught of migration, whether it's specific to climate or other. Every country is dealing with trying to have a pluralistic society where people's agency is at the very least honored, and because it is good for business and peace. So humans are resilient. I think those companies will fail, but I do think that we will be here. Like this work and people like us, because as the US falls down, our client growth is great in Europe, and Canada wants to differentiate. We just got a call from one of the big 4 auditors, and they're like, we need to be certified to deal with the Canadian government at all. And I'm like, great.
Yeah, you know what? It's so interesting for you to say that, because I'm thinking about leadership. And forever, the US, not forever, but for a long time, the US has been seen as the leader, the place where there is peace, and where there are, and that peace, even within the differences and the diversity, and really seeing the diversity as an asset, not a liability. But we can lose that very, very easily.
Yeah, we can. But as the world becomes, kind of draws its ideological lines, I do think that sort of the mesh regions, and we could put like the Northeast United States and maybe the North in general, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, et cetera, with Canadians, like there's a shared ideology there. It's less dog eat dog, I'm here alone. And then you go below the Mason-Dixon, sometimes it can get a little dog eat dog, but we see that in other countries as well, in the borders between, Germany and Austria and Switzerland, and you name it. So I think that there are slowly but surely becoming 2 worlds, those that believe that integration and inclusion are still at the core of how we identify people's agency and distribute value to them. And then there are other people that think segregation and exclusion are at the core of how we distribute value. And I think the real big difference between the two ideologies is people who understand that we are living in a time of abundance, even if we cannot access all of that abundant value because it's trapped. We'll get to that. Or people who think that we live in these times of scarcity and they have to, I don't really even blame all the conservatives. I think humans are terrible risk managers, and they all go, I won't have enough, so we can't help you because I got to help my team over here. And if you come any closer, I have to kill you. And that has been at the core of our interaction for, again, about 200,000 years. I think that we'll get out of it in the next 200 or 300, but I won't be here to see it. I don't know if I want to be, but I think we'll do what we can while we're here. I am slightly hopeful, mainly because that woman from 81, again, her name is Dawn Bennett Alexander. Everyone should Google her. She wrote the book called Employment Law. By the time I was in B school learning employment law with the rest of the classes for an MBA, I was reading her book. She was a lawyer. She was an employment lawyer. Ended up going to University of Georgia. She started all this at Georgia at their B school. And she was just really leveraging Title VII. She was like, oh, these claims these grievances that will come across the federal government's desk after the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and mind you, this is 15 years later, they would address everything unless it had to do with gender or race, the two big scary ones. Mm-hmm. And she was like, oh, these are actually just Title VII violations. So they started teaching a class on Title VII violations. In her view as a lawyer, to do or not to do DEI is to do or not to do Title VII. And the finance folks go, it is just to do or not to do the types of liability lines that are tied to Title VII. And that's the world that we live in. The law works, it can work. And for everyone who's a little on edge right now, I think it is important for you to remember that the law has not changed.
Yes.
And
yes.
We've gotten so far. When people go, there's a pushback and we're taking 10 steps back. No, we're not. Again, I totally understand everyone that has a bit of anxiety about these times because they're not steeped in this work or steeped in the history. And, once a thing changes, you get used to it immediately and you expect things to always be like that. So everyone's thinking as 2025 came into play, the world should work like it did in 23 or 18 or 19. They're not thinking about 81, 91, 01, 61. They're not thinking, they're not used to it. And it's really, I think we are at the cultural point in any given time that a 15-year-old arrives at. It is a difference between not being aware of the world under 10 and being very aware of the world and yourself at 15. It's not a 25 or 45 or 75-year-old's world. It's a 15-year-old's world. We're resilient. We've been around. We've fallen down a few times and gotten up. If stuff got crazy, we go, well, I guess I could tolerate this, but the kids will not tolerate it. Just like,
I want to believe that is true. And I do worry about that next, the 10-year-olds who are where things are being pulled away from them. So it means history, context, all of that, trying to wash it. But that to me just means that we have work to do to keep them in the fold, understanding the history, telling the stories, keeping the narratives going, regardless of whatever actions are attempted. Where do people find you, JFK? How do they follow you? How do they know what's going on with you?
I think all the latest stuff, if anyone just goes to jamesfeltonkeith.com, I'm on all the social media it's pretty long with James Felton Keith, except Twitter, but I'm not really on there anymore. I just said JFKII.
Okay.
I'm on the internet. Inclusion Score, just at inclusionscore.org. We're regularly publishing new stuff, but we'd love everyone to join us.
Thank you so much for spending your voice with us. We appreciate it. We value it and we value you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to follow me at Vernā Myers on Instagram and Twitter. You can also listen to my podcast on Spotify and Apple Music. Subscribe to my channel and share this episode with someone who is going to join us in this space. Make sure to visit my website for DEI resources and online learning courses at vernamyers.com, and make sure you sign up for my newsletter to stay in touch with me. Thank you again for listening, and see you next time for more Sundays with Vernā.